Mike was made in Denmark, assembled on Faroe Islands, Rhodesia, and Canada. He was imported to the US from the UK in 2008. His wife, Sue, and son, Marcus, both cancer survivors, were inspired to establish Ozark Akerz Regenerative Farm near Coleridge, North Carolina in 2014. Their regenerative farming practices are inspired by indigenous principles, a journey that is much about unlearning as it is about learning. So with that, let me hand it to Mike. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Brooke. Just give me a second here to share my screen. Can y'all see that?
Yes.
All right. Well, I just want to thank CCP for inviting me here to present about our small farm approach to increasing biodiversity and conservation. I don't have a video feed. We're out here in snail speed internet country, but hopefully the audio and the slide transitions will work just fine. We'll find out. Agenda for today, I'll do a brief introduction of Ozark Akerz, and then I'll get into the meat of the presentations about how our heritage breed Pineywoods cattle have helped improve forest health and vice versa. I also want to share a couple of tools that we learned from the CCP. We've been attending meetings probably for 2 to 3 years now, and these are our 2 apps that we have put to use on the farm, and I'll give you a bit of details about that. And then finally, I'll go into some resources I want to share and take your questions. As Brooke mentioned, our approach to regenerative farming is very much based on indigenous principles. We take an ecosystem-centered approach to managing the farm, so we don't just focus on one element like the grass or the animals. We try to take everything into account when we make those decisions. We're very passionate about conservation, both land and wild animals and wild plants, and of course of the endangered heritage breed farm animals that live here. When we talk about biodiversity here, we're of course interested in the species, but we're also interested in functional biodiversity, which is how those species interact and how they benefit or don't benefit each other. We grow and forage our own food and medicine, and some of that food we also sell to the public, like our Pineywoods heritage beef. I almost didn't include this last bullet point because I thought it would be self-evident because we are a regenerative farm, but I decided to include it anyway for sake of clarity. As we go through the slides, you'll see some quotes I've included on the bottom of some of them. And a lot of these are voices of indigenous individuals who have inspired our journey. And where that's the case, I've included the name of their tribe or nation next to their name. We've been involved in K through college education for quite some time. I think one of the funnest projects we've been involved in is Professor Matt Kochi's Chicken Nuggets on Mars, which taught middle schoolers how to raise chickens on Mars. Of course, you can't go to Tractor Supply, and you can't go to any farm supply store to get your fertilizer or your feed. So teaching them about sustainability and how the fertilizer of the chickens can feed the plants, and the plants can feed the chickens, and the chickens can provide the humans with eggs and meat. It was an important part of that program. 4-H events, we've been involved in Randolph County and other counties around the state as well. Harnett County, we are involved in their Farm to Fork program this year, which teaches kids about a farm and then takes products from that farm and cooks them and we actually provided some beef and liver. Greg, who you can see in the picture, was a little bit dubious about the liver, but we gave him a recipe for our Danish liver pate, and he's hoping to see how the kids respond to that. He said they had I think it was tofu he made for them a few months ago, and they were a bit skeptical about that too. I'm sure they will be about the liver. Most recently, we've been starting to get involved in career fairs for middle schoolers, teaching them what it is to be a regenerative farmer. And then from a community community perspective, we donate a lot of our eggs and beef to food pantries, and we also have three families that we've been providing food to on a weekly basis, both the beef and the eggs, since March of last year when COVID started. Animals, heritage, all of which are heritage that live here. Pineywoods cattle were brought to what is now the southeastern United States by Spanish hunters, and they're very heat tolerant. They've got disease and parasite resistance, and they've got a wide foraging behavior, which I'll go into a bit more detail in the presentation. We raise blue slate and bourbon red turkeys. This is Romeo on the left. He's a great guard turkey, actually. He works to protect the chicken flock from hawks. We've actually seen him hawks fly down and land on the ground near the flock, and he will flap those powerful wings and chase them off. We raise a variety of heritage chickens, including Dominiques, brown and white leghorns. And I just want to take a little bit more time to focus on cotton patch geese, which are the latest additions to the farm. They joined us in April, and this is what they looked like yesterday. They were just a day old when we got them. They're fast growing. They were during the Great Depression, they were a great source of meat, eggs, and grease for families. Because they are so critically endangered, though, at Ozark Akerz, they will only be weeding and breeding for the foreseeable future, so we can help increase the population numbers. There seems to be a lot of talk about ticks this year in particular, so I wanted to point out, if you've got a resident possum, they're great tick eaters. We've also got guinea fowl. Just to give you an example of how they have helped us here, in the first year when we moved here in 2014, Sue and I had probably 24 tick bites each, and last year we had one between the two of us, and this year so far we've had none. They are great for tick control, and they're also good predator controls. I've seen a female guinea intimidate a fox back into the woods. And finally, our rescue farm cats, Lemmy on the left and Bones on the right. So how the Pineywoods have helped the forest health: we have a lower pasture, which is near the farmhouse, and we have an upper pasture, which is separated by 15 acres of forest. And when we moved here in 2014, it was completely impenetrable. There was all types of invasives in there. We brought the herd of Pineywoods in 2015, a total of 6, a bull and 5 cows, and their appetites and their offspring's appetites have helped clear that 15 acres out. They eat a lot of different things, including poison ivy, and we now have less poison ivy on the non-cattle side of the fence than we do in the cattle side of the fence. I haven't eradicated it totally yet on that side of the fence, but we need to find a way to let them around the farmhouse so they can graze in there and get rid of some of it for us. After 2 years of grazing in there, we discovered that we had a barn that was buried deep in the woods. It was completely covered with brambles and greenbrier, and they cleaned that out. Now I'm 6'3", and I can walk upright in much of the area that they've cleaned out. And more importantly, I can do it without getting torn up by the thorns on the greenbriers and the brambles. In addition to that, we're seeing a lot of biodiversity, new biodiversity in the forest, including Adamasco lilies and cardinal flowers. Having that sun filter through the canopy is helping provide that. So we didn't think to take a picture before we let the cattle in. This is a picture of the woods behind the upper pasture, which we have not let them in yet. It looked very similar to this in 2015, although it did have a lot more kudzu growing in it. And the one on the left is what it looks like now. You can see the sun filtering through the canopy, and you can see the trunks of the trees as well. So flipping it over on how the woods have benefited the Pineywoods, there is a story that they ran wild in the Southeast for 350 years. That's a little bit difficult to verify, but that and the minimal human genetic selection that they've had, they've kind of retained their behavior and some of the traits that they had when they were roaming the longleaf pine forests of the Southeast. And that includes grazing for their own medicine. And what we discovered, one example was the black walnut that they were eating. We found it had jugulone in it, which is a natural antiparasitic, and they won't eat it very often, but occasionally they'll take a bite of leaf, they'll take a branch, and they'll even nibble a little bit of bark. And we think that they do it when they need a little bit of parasite control. So based on that observation, which probably happened over a year and a half, we stopped rotationally grazing. I know Nita just talked about the benefits of rotational grazing, but as I said originally, we kind of have to take the whole ecosystem into account. And we've now let them have access to all of the 15 acres of woods in both the lower and the upper pasture at all times. So they have access to what they need when they need it. Very much mimicking, or trying to mimic anyway, what they had when they ran wild. Trees are obviously very important for carbon capture and biodiversity. Clear cutting has a very negative impact on bird populations and others. So maintaining the tree stands that we have here is important for us. And we are just thrilled that the Pineywoods have helped us maintain and keep that. Usually when you think about cattle, you think about people cutting trees down. We're able to maintain them because of their behaviors. So when we went to CCP a couple of years ago and learned about iTree Canopy, we were kind of excited to know that we could use this to capture information about how much carbon the trees were sequestering. And we also found out later that it also provides information about air pollutants and hydrology runoffs, how much runoff it prevents, and a possible revenue stream. You go, basically iTree is online, and you go onto their website and it randomly shows you a location on the property map that you draw out to begin with. And then you can choose whether it's pasture or trees or brushland. We only had trees and pasture outlined in there because that's all we've got, but you can be more specific depending on what you have on your property. And this is what iTree Canopy gave us in terms of how much carbon we are capturing, which we were very surprised and pleasantly surprised to see how much, over 8,000 pounds of carbon dioxide being sequestered a year. As I mentioned, the pollutant removals, neither of us knew that ozone was absorbed by trees as well. So that was good to see. The monetary value, this is based on EPA figures that iTree Canopy uses. I'm not sure how accurately that represents the carbon capture industry's amounts. But in any case, the carbon capture industry usually focuses on very big landowners and tracts of land. We're not. So we're looking at discovering a new model that can help us monetize that as a small farm. My son, Marcus, just graduated with a master's in health economics. So he's offered to help us define some of that as well. So moving on to biodiversity, we have a lot of projects going on right now. I do want to point out a couple of them in particular. The soil microbiome. We started adding raw milk that was thinned out with water and pouring it under trees and in the garden, as well as blood from the packaging. When we cut open a package of beef of the Pineywoods, there's always remnants of blood, and we mix that with water and pour it under the trees in the garden as well. The other project in particular I wanted to talk about is the Indian potatoes or ground nuts that we're growing. We're trying to introduce new perennial foods. It's less work to grow perennial foods, and Indian potatoes or ground nuts used to be prevalent from Canada down to the Gulf Coast of Mexico. And we got 25 seed sets from Utopian Seeds seed project up in the North Carolina mountains that we planted earlier this spring. And many of them seem to be doing very well. They grow an edible tuber, they grow an edible bean pod, and they also have great pollinator attracting flowers as well. Brooke mentioned our journey was as much about unlearning as it was learning. And part of this has been, weeds in particular. Weeds are basically just a synonym for food or medicine. We've got musk thistles that grow out here in the pastures, and they are food for insects, pollinators, and birds. And you can also eat the young stalks, strip the spines off, and you've got some food for the two-legged humans on the property as well. The second app that I want to focus on is the iNaturalist. Some of you may be familiar with this. And this is an app that I use pretty much every single day, especially this time of the year, because there's so much life on the farm. We have been uploading photos and using it since 2019. We just started recording sounds last month, so I'm not going to have a lot to tell. Yes.
5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. We're not going to have a lot to talk to you about that, but I will go into just briefly what we found last month. I did a categorization and found that we have 470 verifiable species on the property. This is what iNaturalist has verified for us. Not surprisingly, the majority of them are plants and insects, but we also surprisingly had 3 species of mollusks. Again, we didn't know that snails were classified as mollusks, so it taught us something around that as well. If you're interested in using the app, I would suggest taking multiple pictures, especially if you're doing plants, the leaves, the stems, the bark, insects from various angles. All of that helps helps iNaturalist try to verify it as a local species. Taking many pictures, if you're uploading once a week, I upload every night when I come in, and that works for me. But if you're uploading more than 5, you can do batch uploads on their website. And you do have to identify a location on the where you've taken it, because some species here may look the same as they do in Africa, and then they need that. I don't use GPS. I just zoom in on the map that iNaturalist has, and that works for me. The other benefits we've seen of using it, we can identify more species without the app. We're seeing and observing more richness just because we're paying more attention to the biodiversity here. And we're also starting to wonder now, we've only got two years of data. So some of these things like identifying beneficial insects and insects that may damage trees and so on, we can start doing now. But increases and decreases, we probably need another 2 to 3 years of data on that. And also collaborating with other regenerative farms and conservationists, both locally and abroad, would be good as well. We have not done that yet. Just a quick mention of resources. If y'all don't have the Visit NC Farm apps, the Farm app, I would encourage you to download it. You can connect to local farms and shops. The counties in orange are currently active, and the ones in light green are talking to local farmers and shops. If you have a physical disability or friends and family with physical disabilities, my son Marcus's cancer left him paralyzed from the chest down, and we collaborated on this video where he explains the challenges of getting around the farm, also shares resources with the general public, but mainly focusing on farmers and veterans in North Carolina. And if you wanted to learn more about the local plants in the Southeast how they have been and are being used by tribes and nations, I would encourage you to visit NC Native Ethnobotany. Our friend Linwood Watson is a member of that. If you'd like to learn more about our journey and a bit more details, I've included a link here to a blog that we wrote that outlines it carefully. And finally, 4 books that have been very instrumental in us shaping our idea of what a regenerative farming journey looks from an indigenous perspective. These 4 books here are great resources for them. So I will take your questions now, or the ones I can't answer, my friend Dave here will hopefully be able to answer for you.
Great, thank you so much. So we have a couple questions and lots of fandom, especially from the steering committee, who's excited to see you using iNaturalist and iTree that you learned about in CCP. So that's awesome. So first question is, we recently learned from a local farmer that their cattle love to eat invasive microspecium. Have you seen this too on your property?
Well, I don't know what invasive microspecium is, so if I could identify it, and maybe
Japanese stilt grass is another name some people use.
what was the name?
Japanese stilt grass.
I don't know.
Okay.
If you can send me a picture of it, if you can send me a picture of it, I can let you know. But the cattle have they have a wide range of foraging behavior. So.
And those before and after pictures of the forest health that you shared with the vines and the kudzu, did you have to do any initial mechanized clearing, or did the cows take it from the before to the after all themselves?
That's all Pineywoods. We didn't touch it at all. And that was it's interesting. We've had people come and buy breeding stock from us that have spent money and time clearing land. And when we've showed them what they've done, they regret it because they don't have a source of food for the Pineywoods, and also they've destroyed probably a beautiful portion of their property as well.
Wow. And do you have recommendations for seed or plant distribution? Do y'all do any of that, or do you have some sources that you'd like to recommend?
So if you're asking about feed that we use for chickens, Reedy Fork Organic Farm up in Gibsonville, that we buy from them. Murray Cohen, he was an organic farmer and my favorite hippie in the world in Chatham County up in, I can't remember where he is, but we buy all of our organic straw that we put out in the chicken house and organic hay for the cattle during the winter from him.
They're in Silco.
Silco, that's right.
On the TLC conserved properties. So great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much.